right round.
Oh, we'll see.
Tell you open those fingers. Right, here we are. Here we are in the outer ward of the Tower of London. That very simply means in between the inner defensive wall here and the outer defensive wall there. The inner wall behind me, that is 50 feet high. The outer wall behind you, that's 28 feet thick. It runs in a street called Mint Street, which runs all the way round the other side. It was called Mint Street very simply because in 1810 the Royal Mint moved out of here. Every coin of the realm was designed in here until 1810. Now it's used for accommodation for my Yeoman Warder colleagues and our families. Now behind me is a very important tower. It's the strongest of all 13 on the inner wall, and it's called, would you believe, Bell Tower. Now usually I have a little quiz as to why it's called the Bell Tower, but I think you're a fairly intelligent group. It's called the Bell Tower because on the top of it there's a bell. The bell on the top of it is a curfew and alarm bell. It is the oldest curfew and alarm bell in all of London. It was rung every time there was an execution, and it's still rung every day today, but we ring it now to tell our visitors that the Tower of London is closing. Because it is the strongest tower, many famous people have been held prisoner here. In fact, upstairs is a room known as the Strong Room. In there was held the young Princess Elizabeth Tudor. She was imprisoned there by her half-sister, Queen Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary. She was held there because she thought she was involved in a plot against her. There was no plot, so she was released. But she was banished from London, told never to return. She did return. 3 years later, she came through the Sallyport there, or the Royal Entrance, because from here she started her own procession. She went from here all the way to Westminster Abbey, where she was crowned Queen Elizabeth I of England, and she ruled this country for 45 years. Behind me is a very famous prisoner, everyone's favourite duke, certainly my favourite duke. You'll all have heard of him. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Anyone heard of James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth? Happy days. Happy days. Do not feel too bad, because he's more famous for his death than his life. He was one of the eldest of 14 illegitimate children of King Charles II, the Merry Monarch. When the Merry Monarch died in 1685, next in line to the throne was a different gentleman called James. It was a big problem for a lot of people with this guy. He was a Roman Catholic, and lots of people wanted a Protestant king. So they persuaded James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, who was a Protestant, to throw his hat into the ring. And he did. He raised a Protestant army, and he came marching towards London. It was going ever so well. It all went badly wrong for him. On the 6th of July, 1685, at the Battle of Sedgemoor. His cavalry was split by a river from the main body of his army. His army was destroyed. He ran off. He was found a week later, arrested, brought back, chucked in here, found guilty of treason, sentenced to death, taken to Tower Hill, and his head was cut off in public. There's nothing really unusual about that part of the story. However, his executioner was a giant of a man called Jack Ketch. Jack Ketch was not a full-time executioner. There wasn't enough work for a full-time job. His full-time job, he was a master butcher in Smithfield Outdoor Meat Market. But he was a very keen amateur alcoholic. And on the morning of the execution, he got up nice and early, very professional. He had a drink to stiffen his resolve, and he dressed himself in his leather executioner's mask and full-length leather apron. He had a drink to stiffen his resolve, and he started to sharpen this huge executioner's woodsman's axe. While he was doing that, he had a couple of drinks to stiffen the old resolve. Then he started marching with his axe on his shoulder towards Tower Hill. Members of the general public and owners of bars and pubs came out and gave him alcoholic drinks to stiffen his resolve. By the time he got to the scaffold, he could barely mount the steps. His resolve had become so stiff by this time. He staggered up the steps and he met the Duke of Monmouth. The Duke of Monmouth gave him a large bag of gold coins. He was a rich man. And he said to him, "Strike true, sir, strike true." Well, if that happened today, Duke of Monmouth's family would have got one of them no-win, no-fee lawyers off the TV, sued him. He did not strike true. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blows of the executioner's axe later, he wasn't dead. One of his arms was hanging up. There was a huge cut In his shoulder blades there was a wound that went through his throat into his mouth, up into his nasal passage. Blood and air were spraying on the crowd as he screamed in pain. The crowd didn't like it, they began to boo. The people at the front were getting wet. Jack Ketch had had enough. In his drunken state he turned to the Sheriff of London, he dropped the axe and he said, "I am done, sir. I can do no more." The Sheriff said, "Mr. Ketch, you will finish this job. You will be next." Well, Jack had a rethink, didn't he? Wasn't that? He dropped to his knees. With his left hand, he pulled the screaming lord along the floor by his hair towards him. His right hand produced a butcher's carving knife from his belt, and he sawed through the remaining sinew and bone on the floor. Very strange, we don't know why. The head and the body were brought back together to the tower. They were taken to the vicar's house. They were placed upon the kitchen table, and they were sewn together. We know this rumour's true because we found his body in 1876 in the church when we was having a clear out. I'll show you exactly where he's buried a little bit later on in the tour. Before we move on, the little office window there with the bars on, that is the Chief Yeoman Warder's office, my boss. Now from his desk he can hear the first block and he can hear the second block. On Monday I was in the office, in trouble, as usual, being told, "Matt, your tour is too bloodthirsty, there's children, there's Americans, they don't like..." Exactly, yeah. Not bloodthirsty enough, drink someone. No, there was too many children and it's too bloodthirsty. He told me to tone it down. Now I personally believe that's what people want to hear. I'm not sure, so I'm going to practice a bit of democracy. I like democracy. Who here, when we move on, wants to talk about execution, murder and prisoners, or, I don't know, unicorns and kittens? Who votes for unicorns and kittens? Who votes for execution, murder and prisoners? Yeah! There you go, Chief. Public has spoken. I'm relieved. I am very relieved. We've got 40 minutes, 35 minutes left. I've only got one unicorn and kitten story. It's about this unicorn that tramples a kitten to death. Take a gap.